power, and sex. That's what this case is about. The defendant, Lori Vallow Daybell, used money, power, and sex, or the promise of those things, to get what she wanted. What she wanted was money, power, and sex.
You are listening to We Saw the Devil, an investigative and conversational true crime podcast that deep dives into fascinating criminal cases that are solved, unsolved, or ongoing. From America's Lori Vallow to Germany's Armin Meiwes, we examine and discuss the world's most shocking cases. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow us online. Check us out at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, you can become part of the show by backing us on Patreon. Hello everyone, you are listening to We Saw the Devil. I'm your host Robin, and y'all, this is the one. I wasn't planning on covering the Lori Vallow trial, but at the last moment, I just had to give in. Tiny bit of context. If you recall, this podcast, We Saw the Devil, was actually the very first one to cover the case. One day, I was pretty much just messing around online, and I saw a literal paid ad, I think it was on the Huffington Post, that featured two missing children. It was a "Have You Seen Us" graphic of JJ Vallow and Tylee RYan. And I immediately sought out additional details, and it became apparent very quickly that something was not right with the situation. And here we are 4 years later, and I just simply can't fathom the journey that we have all been on. I mean, that's not even mentioning the Vallow, Woodcock, and Daybell families and everything that they have been through, which I just can't imagine. From the case going viral to the dozens of Facebook groups, subreddits, YouTube channels covering this case, to learning way more about the LDS Church than I ever wanted to, miscellaneous deaths, and then finally the discovery of the children. And as I've said, I've made some incredible friends along the way, and I just wanted to thank all of you for listening. That being said, we've made it. We finally are at trial in this case, at least with Lori Vallow. Before we get into it, guys, you already know where you can find the show across social media. The website is WeSawTheDevil.com, and from there you can find all of the links as well as the ones for the show's Patreon. Now, every Sunday, I'm going to post an update episode like this one, reviewing that previous week's trial news. So we're skipping the jury selection process and heading straight into week 2, officially week 1 of testimony. This isn't going to be a play-by-play. This is going to be an overview of what we've learned, what has been confirmed, and also just a little bit of an explainer for those of you who are just now hearing about this case. It's complex. I can't think of another case in my lifetime that I've heard about that has this many twists, turns, or people involved. Seeing some of the comments on news articles of people asking things like, who's Brandon Boudreaux? Who's Melanie Pulowski? I'm like, oh, you sweet summer child. And you don't know where to begin to explain their role in all of this. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send them over, info@WeSawTheDevil.com. Listen to previous episodes. You will get the gist. So last Monday, April 10th, Lori Vallow and the defense team, Rob Wood, Lindsay Blake, and the rest of them arrived at the Ada County Courthouse in Boise. Judge Stephen Boyce is presiding over this case, if you're just now tuning in, and he went over a few procedural items. He thanked the jurors for their service to the community, and then the trial officially kicked off. Now, Lindsay Blake provided the opening statement for the prosecution, which you heard in the intro to this episode. Money, power, sex. Lindsay Blake did not mince words. She immediately launched into the state's claims. Quote, Tylee had money, Lori wanted it. Tylee is gone. The money being an obvious reference to the Social Security benefits that Tylee was able to collect due to her father, Joseph RYan, dying. Lindsay Blake also mentioned JJ Vallow and said that he was difficult and his care was high touch. Too much time and energy for Lori Vallow because she wanted to focus on Chad Daybell. Then Tammy Daybell. As Chad's Daybell wife, she stood in the way of two things. Lori and Chad riding off happily into the sunset ever after, and then also the life insurance policy that Chad stood to inherit in case of her death. All 3 of those people are now gone. Blake then touched on the discovery of the children. Tylee and JJ were found on Chad Daybell's property on June 9th of 2020. JJ wrapped in duct tape and garbage bags. Tylee, well, there wasn't much left of her. A mass, a glob of tissue and bone. A spade and a pickaxe found in a shed on Chad Daybell's property had Tylee RYan's DNA on it. Now, we've been following this case for years at this point. We know these things, minus the spade and the pickaxe. But sitting here in 2023 and hearing a prosecutor state these things out loud in the setting of a trial was absolutely surreal. I mean, I don't know how many of you, when you heard the audio, just had the thought, holy crap, well, we're here now. Like, Lori Vallow is finally on trial for these crimes. The opening statement is a way for each side to frame their angle and intent, right? Their claim. From Lindsay Blake's perspective, so it would be something along the lines of the prosecution, the state. These are beautiful kids. Lori Vallow killed or conspired to kill them for these reasons. We have the evidence, we have the pictures, and we have the receipts to prove it. And that's basically what Lindsay Blake did in her opening statement. Then Jim Archibald opened for the defense. Honestly, guys, I'm not lying when I say that I was super excited to see Mark Means be Lori's defense attorney. For those of you just now tuning in or interested in this case and listening to this, Mark Means was Lori's previous lawyer, and he had a full-time constant ticket on the Hot Mess Express. He just was always disheveled, so many typos in all of the legal writings and briefings that he would have, the motions and appeals, and he loved the spotlight of this. He would go on court TV and different channels and give interviews, and he just did not have his shit together. And I think we were all looking forward to Mark Means, although, kind of worried that he would not really represent her very well and cause like a mistrial or something. He was that bad. But ultimately, because the death penalty was introduced and placed on the table, he was not death penalty qualified. So Lori actually had to get a new legal team to represent her, hence Jim Archibald and the rest. As you would expect, Jim Archibald painted a beautiful picture, a beautiful portrait of a loved friend and a loving and responsible mother. He touched on Lori Vallow's life history and acknowledged that she was very religious and had an interest in the end days, the apocalypse, the end times, revelations. He confronted and acknowledged that there is known evidence against Lori Vallow. But he also basically says, yeah, the kids are dead and they were found on Chad Daybell's property, but there are a few differences in opinion regarding how they did die. So ultimately, he did the same thing that Lindsay Blake did on Lori's behalf and reminded the jury that the burden of proof lies with the prosecution. It lies with the state. So the state must prove Lori Vallow's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt if they want to convict her. So that being said, notable moments from day one. Kay Woodcock and Brandon Boudreaux both testified, with Kay taking the stand immediately after the defense's opening statement. She was questioned by prosecutor Rob Wood. Kay went through the family history of Charles and Lori, the state of their marriage, Charles's death, the aftermath of how it felt when she lost contact with JJ, what was a red flag. She described how she and her husband Larry wanted to adopt JJ and give him a good home because it was clear that Lori Vallow just didn't really want him anymore. She talked about logging into Charles, her brother's, Gmail account and seeing an email from Amazon confirming a delivery to Lori Vallow's apartment in Rexburg. And this isn't news, but it was kind of crazy to hear Kay talk about it. The browsing history showed a beach wedding dress, a bathing suit, and a men's large linen top and pants, as well as those infamous malachite wedding rings. All of these things were dated October 2nd, 2019. Kay was already well aware that Tammy Daybell had died on October 19th, so the wedding plans predated Tammy Daybell's death. It was interesting and heart-wrenching hearing from Kay. She really set the stage, and good for her too, because without Kay Woodcock, it's even questionable of whether we would even be where we are, honestly. It's incredible how big of an impact one person's decisions and actions can be. And Kay is responsible for, I believe personally, all of this. After Kay, Brandon Boudreaux took the stand and was questioned by prosecutor Rachel Smith. He described his close personal relationship to both Charles and Lori, how he watched JJ and Tylee both grow up. He even baptized Tylee after Charles asked him to. He talked about his ex-wife Melanie's relationship with her Aunt Lori and how she saw Lori more as a mother figure than an aunt, and how Melanie went from barely religious before they got married, hardly religious at all, to a complete zealot as she spent more time with Lori. Eventually going as extreme in her belief, like for preparing for the end days, attending extremist talks, the offshoot groups and things like that, reading a lot of the fictional literature from the Chad Daybells and Julie Rose. And I believe, Melanie was also into Jason Mao as well. She went from 0 to 60. He also discussed the day back in October of 2019 when someone shot at him from a Jeep Wrangler after he pulled in front of his home. But most of all, it was really sad and gutting to hear Brandon break down into sobs when he brought up how he felt when he first heard that the kids had been found. It was the day before his wedding. He actually volunteered to identify JJ's remains so that the Woodcocks didn't have to. And that broke me. With everything that Kay and Larry have been through, and then they would have been the ones to identify the children's remains, just Brandon came through on that one. So that was relatively it for day one. Still not a tremendous amount. I'll touch on a couple things. Still not a tremendous amount of new information. One thing pertaining in particular to Tammy Daybell, but we'll get there. Day two saw Detective Ray Hermosillo of the Rexburg Police Department testify. And boy, was that a hard one. So much detailed information there that was just hard to listen to. It was difficult to process. So more or less, he joined the investigation on November 1st when he was contacted by the Fremont County Sheriff's Office that there was a Jeep in Rexburg that was possibly involved in a homicide. He and other investigators did surveillance on Lori's townhouse, but never saw any children. When the Gilbert Police Department came up from Arizona to serve the warrant over the Jeep, they actually told him about Kay Woodcock and JJ missing. And then he obviously later learned about Tylee. But the most interesting piece from his testimony, to me, there are multiple. Obviously, it's the discovery of the children. He was there on the property. We'll get there in a moment. When police served a search warrant on Lori, Melanie P., and Alex's apartments, police found in Lori's garage a few toys, a few items belonging to JJ, obviously including that prescription medication that has been discussed since the very beginning. However, they also found several guns in Lori's apartment. It was described as Army-type knives, empty magazines for various weapons, multiple types of guns, and also apparently something else, because the direct quote is, quote, "There were things of that nature in the garage that caught our eye." Also, there was black duct tape found in the garage as well. Detective Hermosillo then described in great graphic detail what happened on the morning of June 9th, 2020, the day that Tylee and JJ were discovered. He was there the day that the search warrant was executed on Chad Daybell's property. Basically, all the local law enforcement agencies were there, as well as the FBI. More or less, they removed the topsoil from an area, saw that it looked moist, then the smell of decomposition hit. They removed more soil and saw the crown of a head. After more digging, they found a body wrapped in black plastic and duct tape. He said that the body was wearing red pajamas and socks and that the hands had been bound in front of his body. Then Tylee's remains were discovered. Charred black gobs of flesh. A piece of skull that crumbled when it was picked up. A green bucket of partially burned remains that had melted and fused together. The remains were sent to Ada County Coroner's Office for autopsy. Because of the level of dismemberment and disfiguration that Tylee's body endured, Dr. Glenn Smith, an orthodontist and deputy coroner in the Ada County Coroner's Office, was called in to identify the remains by matching an irregular jawline with an X-ray of Tylee when she was alive. They then showed pictures from the crime scene, including the remains of both children. I highly suggest watching the heartbreaking recap from East Idaho news reporter Nate Eaton on this topic. This man has been on the case from the very, very, very beginning. I think we all recall Nate chasing Lori and Chad down a parking lot in Hawaii, asking them where the kids were. Where are the kids? Where are the kids? Where are the kids? He was like a bulldog. Mormon bulldog. But he's been so incredibly invested in this case and done such a great job providing news updates. As you all know, I do have my critiques of Nate, especially his softball interview question and his style, but I do believe that he's done a phenomenal job with this just huge national case in his own backyard. I can imagine that that day in court will probably follow and haunt him for the rest of his life. Also to note on day 2 is that Lori had a little bit of a breakdown, like literally a hit, what we call in the South, pitching a hissy. Day 1, she seemed happy, smiling, engaging with her attorneys. She took a lot of notes, otherwise pretty stoic during witness testimonies. She was the same the morning of day 2 and showed no emotion while Detective Hermosillo was talking about the children's remains, or even when the photos were put up on the screen, it seemed. But after a late morning lunch break, Lori came back into the courtroom visibly upset, like she'd been crying. She spoke with her counsel, and then they summoned the prosecution. Everyone came back in, and the defense team announced to Judge Boyce that Lori wanted to waive her presence at the testimony for the remainder of the day. Like, what? Lindsay Blake was pretty much like, hell no, and said that the state of Idaho deserves to have her present. There is a piece of legislation that would allow her to waive her presence, but ultimately Judge Boyce has the power here and said that her presence can and should be required and that her request was denied. So she was shackled and locked to the floor so that she couldn't leave. I would pay money to be able to witness that. In any case, Detective Hermosillo's testimony was interesting due to the descriptions of the remains, which, as heartbreaking and awful as it is, we've all kind of been waiting on these details. Something I noted as well was when he talked about first going to the townhouse and running into Chad and Alex. After being asked about JJ's whereabouts, Alex apparently got a really scared look on his face and looked over at Chad. And that's the moment that Chad claimed that he didn't know Lori very well, but Detective Hermosillo and the other investigators were well aware of the fact that Chad and Lori had been married for a couple weeks at that point. So, complete bullshit. But Alex looking scared or nervous and then looking over to Chad to possibly get help or backup or something is actually notable to me. I did read somewhere that at least one Cox family member has said that Alex had developmental disabilities. We already know that he wasn't the brightest crayon in the box and that he has a lifetime of examples of impulse control issues. But the more I hear, the more I think that this case is the perfect storm of religion, manipulation, greed, and mental illness. And speaking of the latter, based on reports that Lori wasn't really looking at anyone or responding to anything for most of the first week, and considering how she's delayed the trial multiple times for not being competent, guys, I really truly do believe that to be true. I believe that she has been largely incompetent throughout this process. There's been a discussion in a lot of the Facebook groups and Reddit, unsubstantiated claims that schizophrenia runs in the Cox family, and that her father, Barry Cox, is also a diagnosed schizophrenic. There's also been mention of sexual abuse of the Cox daughters by Barry and or Alex, although that hasn't, again, officially been substantiated in a public forum. And I think that all of us are completely underestimating at the base level just how strong, corrupting, and all-encompassing religious zealotry can be. Heaven's Gate, the People's Temple, and I've been recently watching the new Waco documentary on Netflix. Those people believe so strongly that David Koresh was the second coming of Christ that they, the Branch Davidians, were willing to kill and get into a massive firefight with the ATF. They even passed bombs, like grenades, out amongst the women of the compound when they were going, they thought the final fight was going to happen with the government, so that these women could pull the pens and just kill all of them, so that they could just go off to glory together. No concern for human life because you have one end goal. The common thread of all of the cults that I just named, apocalyptic worldviews with only one pathway to an afterlife, at least a happy type of afterlife. Lest we not forget that Chad Daybell had more followers than just Lori Vallow, Melanie Gibb, and whoever else. We'll touch on that in a moment when we discuss Zulema and Melanie Gibb's testimonies, but the fact remains that this entire belief system was the brainchild of Chad Daybell. The question is, we all know that Lori is a shit stain on society that has zero regard for human life. She's greedy. She's done a lot of horrible stuff in her life, even predating this. But just how far did her greed maliciousness, and ill will go? And where exactly does the religious devotion, the zealotry, the brainwashing, and the mental illness, how far does that meet it? In any case, day 3 was an abbreviated day in court due to a death in Lindsay Blake's family. However, Detective Hermosillo was cross-examined, and then the 4th witness, Lieutenant Jared Wilmore of the Madison County Sheriff's Office, and then also a 5th witness, Lieutenant Joe Powell, they both testified. So the call between Chad and Lori was played, the same one where Chad sounds worried on the phone because he has the FBI quite literally in his backyard getting ready to excavate. I'm sure he was a little bit nervous, but he kind of gave a veiled warning to Lori at that time. But now on to 2 additional testimonies that I found way more interesting and impactful. And that would be Zulema Pastinas, Alex Cox's wife, and Melanie Gibb, former BFF forever of Lori Vallow. Now, Melanie Gibb testified on April 13th, the 4th day of the trial, and she was the 6th witness to be called. And she gave her typical Melanie Gibb spiel, how she met Lori, how they became close, how she introduced her to Chad. She gave a lot of, quote, I don't recall type answers, which honestly, in my opinion, it makes her look like a pretty piss poor witness in a lot of ways. She does not come off as a very believable person in any way. When Melanie Gibb began to explain Lori's belief in multiple probations and having been married to Chad several times, if you recall, Chad told her that they'd been married several times. And I mean, he really laid on the religious, I am the king and you are my queen. And it has been so through time and dimensions, just so fast, like immediately upon meeting each other. But when Melanie Gibb began explaining this, the defense team actually objected to it. Quote, it was not the belief of the prosecution's opposition, aka Lori. The prosecution then had to change the wording from opposition to co-conspirator, Chad. Guys, I wonder, was that kind of like the Easter egg? Was that just kind of the hint that Lori's attorney is setting the stage for finger pointing at Chad? Because again, Melanie Gibb started talking about the multiple probations and all of this shit, and then Lori's attorney objected to that, saying it was not the belief of the prosecution's opposition, aka Lori. The prosecution had to change their wording from opposition to co-conspirator, meaning Chad. And Melanie Gibb, y'all, man, this bitch. We've talked a lot about M. Gibb on this show already. You know, the I'm such a nice, naive little Mormon lady mask that she pulls on in front of everyone. But then you hear the snarky and not so nice side of Melanie Gibb in secretly recorded phone calls where she basically said Tylee was a bitch and JJ was a drug baby. I mean, I think it's safe to say that had Melanie Gibb come forward and reached out to the police when the zombie stuff first started, 3 lives could have potentially been saved. Now, I am not saying that is definitive truth. Law enforcement fucked up this case pretty heavily and pretty early on their own. Charles Vallow was ringing the alarm bells so early on, and no one would help him or believe him. I mean, the man saw all the red flags, and he was out there screaming, hey, there are more red flags in this woman right now than a Soviet parade. And everyone just bought into Lori's shtick that she had going. From conversations I've had with friends of mine, and also many of you who listen and who are invested in this case, everyone seems to think that Melanie Gibb isn't being as forthright as she should be and could be. And I mean, that makes sense, right? She was at like ground zero of this fuckery. I mean, come on. Can you really be like, I didn't know? There's no way. There is no way that Melanie Gibb did not know what was going on in her soul, in her core. Just 0% chance. But typically, that's Melanie Gibb. She may actually be called back, as well as the next person who we're going to discuss here, tying it up. Zulema Pastinas. Now, she's an interesting one. A couple years ago, a friend actually located a previous longtime employer of Zulema, and I interviewed them for a Patreon-only episode. See what kind of person Zulema is. What kind of track record does she have? Now, she's very religious as well, but she's actually kind of like more into the new age side of spirituality, the healing work, the energy work. She's so into energy work that she actually did professional cuddling for a couple years. Zulema, to me, sounds like a much better witness as a whole. I do feel that Zulema, after researching her heavily and looking at her life, I feel that she is kind of misguided and lost. It sounds like she has had a whole life of traumatic experiences with men. She's moved around quite a bit. She has been very much, I wouldn't call her necessarily like a religious zealot, but she's a zealot in terms of new age stuff, right? Like energy work, healing, things like that. She talked about her relationship with Alex. Nothing incredibly new here. I think just hearing Zulema for an extended period of time and hearing what she had to say, she very much acknowledged her piece in this, right? Like you could tell that Zulema had regrets. You could tell that she accepted that she was a part of this in some way, shape, or form. She was connected to it and that she feels bad about it, which is more than we can say for Melanie Gibb, but I digress. But Zulema talked about her role. If you recall, she was brought into the group and it was a group of, her, Lori Vallow, Melanie Pulowski, Melanie Gibb, and Melanie Pulowski, while she was still, and then also after married to Brandon Boudreaux, Zulema was a part of this. And she talked about the type of castings that they did and cast out spirits and the rituals that they would take part in, and when they would stand in circles and hold each other's hands and try to cast out demons from people's bodies. And she admitted that they did this multiple times for Charles, multiple times. Zulema more or less just recapped a lot of stuff that we knew. She did mention a couple new names that we haven't heard yet in this trial. So basically what that is there were other women involved, not just the main players that we are aware about. She talked about the blessing that Alex Cox received from Chad Daybell just a couple weeks, not even a couple weeks before he was found dead, before he was on the toilet, and then he pieced out, he unalived. It was just really interesting to hear Zulema's perception on all of this. Again, not a lot of new information, but I found Zulema to be incredibly fascinating and suggest if you're going to listen, look, I know there's a lot of audio in this trial associated with this trial. I have a hard time keeping up with it myself, but I highly suggest listening to Zulema's testimony. As interesting, colorful, shall I say, of a character as she is, I definitely think that she's going to be a stronger witness. And it's also because she has immunity. If you guys recall, Zulema actually does have use immunity, although it is in Arizona. In terms of Melanie Gibb, it is unknown as to whether she has immunity. And I think about this one a lot when I'm falling asleep late at night. And I'm just like, damn, does she have immunity or not? Again, Zulema has it in Arizona. Melanie Gibb, though, if you recall back in the hearing when Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow were arrested and they had the great jury hearing and everything, Melanie Gibb was asked flat out, do you have immunity? And she said, no, I have God on my side. Oh, you sweet baby, bless your heart. So I wonder, though, if she does at this point have immunity, some sort of deal, because I can't understand how she would be here if she didn't. She is a co-conspirator. Both Melanie Gibb and Zulema Pastenis are co-conspirators. What that means is that they were, again, ground zero. They had more than enough information, interactions, text messages, phone calls, emails, words, face-to-face interactions with the defendants. And they were aware of enough of the nature of what was kind of going on around them that they are considered co-conspirators. But Melanie Gibb's immunity status, I keep wondering. So to tie this up, let's just talk about a couple items that I found interesting as a whole across the first week. I've already mentioned it, but that pickaxe and the shovel that had Tylee's DNA on it in the shed, whether those tools were used as tools for her dismemberment or death, I don't know. Or if it was just transferred to those as the remains were moved originally. Don't know, but that's very important. Also, the biggest piece for everyone is that Tammy's autopsy revealed that the cause of death was asphyxiation by another, which I assume means that she was likely strangled and or smothered. Because when Lindsay Blake said, by the hands of another, I think we all pretty much stopped, dropped, and rolled in that moment. Just, wow. That's a pretty important piece. It changes a lot. There were so many different accounts and so many different versions of how Tammy Daybell died. Some people initially reported that much like Alex Cox, she had a little bit of pink foam around her mouth. And then supposedly, rumors came that Garth was at home that day that Tammy Daybell died and helped Chad get her back up on the bed. And there are all of these different stories floating around and theories as to how Tammy Daybell died. Unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to find out what really happened to either JJ or Tylee, specifically, most likely Tylee. But I do believe that we are going to get an answer for what happened to Tammy Daybell. And just absolutely heartbreaking. Again, there was a circle of followers beyond the main players in this. So there are other people who were involved in this kind of little offshoot group from Chad Daybell. Another one, really interesting one, it was in Arizona. Zulema, Melanie Gibb, Lori, and a couple people were, I believe at Zulema's house, and they were trying to do a casting session. And apparently Lori received a phone call, and Zulema heard her say, "Moron, and idiot can't do anything right." And that was after Alex Cox had tried to shoot Tammy Daybell and failed. He tried to kill Tammy Daybell, failed, and then Lori Vallow was like, "Idiot, can't do anything right. Moron." Which, as much as I have always been a believer in Lori Vallow having tremendous mental illness, I can't deny that almost pulls it back a little bit. And is like, Lori is coherent and aware enough, right? In reality enough to be angry over the fact that Alex did not kill her boyfriend's wife. To me, that kind of shows that Lori Vallow was very much aware, but I digress. And then finally, the last piece, that John Pryor, Chad Daybell's attorney, has been present for most of Lori's trial. He has been there, I think, a couple mornings in the morning. He came in late, but John Pryor has been there for the trial so far, presumably trying to get ahead and seeing which angle each side is going to take so he can properly position his client, aka Chad Daybell, and get ahead there. But it was a very, very, very somber, sad first week to this case. I very much look forward to them getting into the details in terms of evidence, the text message evidence, and what kind of surveillance they had on these people. I still have a feeling that we haven't seen, well, I don't have a feeling, I know. We haven't seen all of the evidence. We haven't seen half the information that they have. So I want to see exactly what investigators and what police knew. That about sums it up. Again, that's just the highlights for me. A lot more went on. I mean, hours and hours and hours of audio each day. But these are the pieces that I found most interesting. Again, next Sunday, I'm going to be posting week 2 recap. This time, it's going to be a little bit longer because the wonderful Iris is going to join me. For those of you who don't know, she is now a data engineer, but she used to work as an autopsy technician, and she has been on the show multiple times. I absolutely love having her on. And we're going to talk about the nitty gritty. We're going to talk about the children, the remains, the more sciencey part of that, as well as have a discussion on the second week of the trial. Before we tie up this episode, I just wanted to provide an update in one particular case that I've been covering for the last year, and that is the Delphi murders. I think that most of us are aware of the fact that a suspect has been arrested for the Delphi murders, at least allegedly. Richard Allen, resident of Delphi, Indiana, has been arrested finally. Honestly, with what I now know, like what I currently know, the video, the voice, all of it, I'm kind of having an inkling that he is probably the responsible party. That being said, there was a case in Florence, Kentucky, where Bill and Peggy Stevenson in their 70s were brutally murdered. Actually blunt force trauma, and they were stabbed an undisclosed amount of times. And this happened back in 2011. So we're going on 12 years ago. Well, after Richard Allen was arrested, police from Boone County, Kentucky, home of Florence, the city, reached out to Delphi and said, "Hey, we are investigating a link between these two cases." Apparently, they received information from someone in Indiana. That person reached out and said that they think the same person may be responsible for the murders of Bill and Peggy. We already know that police in Delphi think that Richard Allen allegedly is, quote, not the only actor involved, and that they are also looking at additional suspects beyond just Richard Allen. But Florence, Kentucky is 198 miles away from Delphi. And the reason that this particular case, I believe, they've stated it, it's not I believe, is that both scenes were incredibly staged. We don't have the details in Delphi at all, most likely due to the incredibly graphic nature of it, as well as the fact that the case was extremely viral, had a lengthy podcast series done on it, and the girls were underage. They were young girls. But the case in Kentucky with Peggy and Bill, they were just about to celebrate their 55th wedding anniversary, and someone came into their home between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. and brutally killed them. Not only that, but whoever committed that crime stayed at the scene in their home somewhere between 3 and 8 hours and staged the whole house. They staged the whole crime scene. They are unsure, but they may have even left and then later come back to finish staging it. Boone County Detective Corey Cox said that it was unlike anything he's ever seen before. Quote, "I've seen some pretty gruesome things, but I've never come across a crime scene like that. It was staged in almost every way that you could think possible. I don't want to elaborate too much, but things were moved and turned over. Things have been touched on bookshelves and in cabinets, and things have been rearranged on the refrigerator. And then with the victims, things had been laid around them and on top of them. We didn't have a crime scene. We had a scene the killer or killers wanted us to find." Now, Detective Cox would not give any additional information on this. However, he said that the information that he was given pointed investigators towards, quote, "a specific person who had a specific item that they were interested in." He obviously refused to specify what kind of item that was or how. In the very least, it links both crime scenes. But currently, an individual who called in on the tip line is cooperating. It's really, really interesting, though. So that little piece of information really, really piqued their interest. Also, it was the manner of the crime scene as well, the cause of death as well. Apparently, an unknown profile was left at the crime scene, so an unknown DNA profile. And there was also a very specific post-mortem wound given to one of the deceased. Don't know who it was, what happened. But there was an unknown DNA profile left at the scene. Extreme posing, the whole house, every element of it was posed. And then also there was a post-mortem wound, meaning post-death, given to one of the victims that apparently is very, very, very specific. So I'm wondering if they are aware or know that that also happened in the Delphi case. But that is really fascinating to me. I can't imagine that Richard Allen, what if they uncover another serial killer who, traveled around the Midwest and killed people? I don't know, but just really information there with the Delphi murders. Looks like they are investigating links to additional crimes there. But that's it for today, guys. That's all I got. Just wanted to get a quick recap episode out, talk about some stuff that I found interesting. Hopefully you found it interesting. Feel free. What is the craziest thing that you've learned so far in the trial? Have you been really surprised about anything? Is it going as expected? Definitely reach out. Let us know. info@wesawthedevil.com. Send over an email. Leave a comment on social media. Would love to read some of your answers out live on the next episode. But yeah, stay hydrated, get some sleep, get prepared, because today, by the time you're listening to this, it'll be Monday. Trial's starting back up today. And later this afternoon, you're going to have more of another full day of testimony and audio to go over. That's it for today, guys. Take care. Until next crime.